Hi, folks. It's the 29th of June, 2021, and this is the weekly meeting of the Documentation Special Interest Group for Kubernetes. I'm Tim. I'll be running this meeting. And the agenda, let me grab the link and put it in the chat, is going to appear in the chat when I paste it in. So if you've got access to that Google Doc, you can access it. If you haven't got access, let us know and we can sort something out. Cool. New contributors. I don't think anyone's new to the weekly meeting. Not at all. Cool. This week's PR Wrangler, that is SF Tim, that's me. Yes, I'm aware that I am me. Next week's PR Wrangler is a US holiday, so it's best effort. Anyone who's an approver or reviewer, please feel free to review and approve. Everyone else, we will be back with you shortly. Okay, let's go on to the 1.22 release documentation. Who would like to speak about that?
I would. Hello. So currently, as it stands, we have a lot of enhancement that basically need docs, pull requests. The problem is that there are a lot of them are at risk. So there's not much that we can do. Enhancements has pinged people about this. And we also, our SIG release team lead has also sent 2 emails in the last 2 weeks reminding people about the upcoming code freeze and also the deadline for the PR, for the docs. Currently we are green. We don't have any issues. The integration branch is healthy.
Quick question, Victor, for the enhancements that are at risk, are they at risk for not being included in the release, or are they at risk for not having docs?
Yeah, they're at risk for not being included because, basically what happened is they don't have all the implementations merged in KK in Kubernetes. So they're still basically for each of them, there's still some code left. There's also, some of them were marked at risk because the enhancement owner did not reply in time. So I expect some of them to really just be kind of false positives, let's say, or false at risk status. And once that is solved, basically we will have a better picture. Once enhancements gets the details back and starts putting everything as tracked, we will know exactly which ones are truly at risk and which ones are not.
So thank you. I got a follow-on question. I guess it makes sense that where enhancements are at risk, we add a hold label to them. Does that feel reasonable?
Yes. So that's something that I noticed with the PR that I already merged. I personally know the person. I work with them in Red Hat, so I have an idea that the pull request does not need any more KK code. So it's already merged. I wanted to ask at worst case scenario, if there is some other code that is needed and this is still at risk or it doesn't make it, is it okay to simply just do an interactive rebase and delete that commit from dev 122? Is that going to wreak havoc on, I don't know, Netlify, on anything else that the site generates? Does anyone know?
I believe we've not come across that thing. Jim, have you got a recollection on that area?
Not necessarily the specific use case, but if we're just doing like a revert commit on the dev 122 branch, I don't see a major impact because it would still write a new one in history. If we were to do any sort of funky, rebasing, potentially we shouldn't have any issues with the master branch or the main branch. But long story short, I think we should be able to do a revert commit on the dev 122 branch, and that'd probably be the best case scenario. And as far as I can tell, there shouldn't be any technical problems with that.
I am minded to say the same thing. Open a new merge request that either is a, what Git thinks is a revert commit, or is a commit that reverts the change, but isn't what Git thinks is a reversion. Either of those, merge that in. And my expectation is that it wouldn't drive the dev 122 branch to be unmergeable. If we get into a pickle, then we can look at doing funky things with rebasing or cherry picking, which is kind of the same thing, but backwards. Let's do the simple thing if we can.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And
sorry, go ahead.
The other thing is, like, I mean, the website repo is chunky. It's a bigger repo than most of the ones I usually work with, but it's a simple enough branching strategy that we can do funky things off to the side on the dev122 branch, leave the main branch as pretty much kind of straightforward, I would say. Mm-hmm. And I'm okay. Like, we'll only ever have one upcoming release branch open. We'll never do anything more complicated. So I think we have that simplicity on our side.
Perfect, thank you. I know that one of the golden rules in the handbook was not to have any kind of revert commits. That's why I was suggesting this interactive rebase and delete. But if this works, then it's okay. That is the only one. I'm quite confident that it will be fine though. But let's see. I just asked in case this scenario actually comes to fruition. At this point, I'm not sure what else we can do. We will try to remind enhancement owners this week that there is an upcoming deadline for the PR. But outside of that, my personal expectation is that there will be a lot of them either on the last day, which is 9th of July. A lot of people will scramble to open PRs, or we will get some basically some late PRs. I noticed that I read the agenda for SIG release, and there were some talks about sort of like an exception process for docs. We don't really have that. I don't know if it makes sense to kick out, features that people have worked on, but it really depends. I mean, if a feature is not documented for me, it means it doesn't exist. And putting something out like that, I don't know, it doesn't make sense. But we'll see. Hopefully, we don't get there. And yeah, we'll see how that goes.
Chip. Sorry, I saw we're both off mute here. One thing I did want to reiterate, this comes up pretty much every release cycle, is that Docs as a subset of the release team does hold sole authority to block a release. And so another alternative option as well, and it hasn't came up yet, it's one of those things where I like to remind folks that exists, at least from a authoritative structure. But one thing I think of is if there isn't docs and we're coming up across deadlines, potentially pushing the release out further based on the lack of docs as somewhat of a solution or something if we didn't have a official exception in place today. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, like you were saying, Victor, but keep that in mind that docs are an incredibly important process in the release cycle, and not having them, like you said, is pretty much detrimental to the user experience, and we need to respect that as well.
Yeah. I would expect to see if something is going to go in without docs and move forward, I would expect to see an item on the SIG Docs agenda, requesting a formal exemption as a minimum. Okay, we haven't got a process, but that's the sort of minimum I'd expect to see. Cool. One bit of context as well, Victor, about that golden rule. We used to have squash as our default strategy for handling pull requests. And in those days, of using squash, I think revert commits would have been a pain. We've moved to using merge by default, squash optionally. And I think that is grounds to remove that golden rule. So you could propose that change, and I recommend that you do.
Yes, yeah, strong +1. I just was saying, great point, Tim. I was thinking, where did that golden rule come from? And you're absolutely right. We ran into so much pain and so many issues when we were having that auto squash happening, and now with the merge strategy, that shouldn't be the case. So strong +1 to that. Thanks for the context.
Cool. Is everyone happy to wrap up the release discussion? Can take more stuff to Slack. Okay, I'm seeing nodding. Okay, next one is issues and PRs. There's one issue. It's from me. I've raised this before. What I want to get is that I want to get consensus about what we're doing with this issue about generating feature gates lists from data. There's two parts. There's a pull request, which is a mechanism to address the issue, and then there's the issue, which is, should we generate feature gates lists from data? Now, the reason I'm raising this is because the PR discussion is kind of mingling two things. One is the should we do it, and the other one is should we do it this way. I want to get the should we do it question settled one way or another, so that we can move on. And then, you know, if we accept it, then the question is this the right way to do it? But I want to get the question of should we do it off the table one way or the other. So I appreciate folks taking a look at that issue and putting in comments about their view. Victor, there was an action on release, SIG Docs release or SIG release docs team to get feedback on that from SIG release.
Yeah, apologies, I didn't get to that. I will do in tomorrow's meeting. Sorry
Cool,
about
that would be really strong. That's really important feedback, because you know a no from SIG release is an obvious we shouldn't do this. I
don't see that they will say a no. And to touch on your point, if we should do it, I definitely think we should do it. I looked at the discussion and I saw that it was kind of dragging on the why a lot. I don't know what other arguments I can bring, but basically it's a lot of PRs right now. Chiming has opened a huge PR to fix exactly this. And as you can see, like he already rebased it twice. So we update during our release, we update that table quite a lot. And I think that if we can somehow not have people do this constantly, just put a YAML, put the value in a YAML, I think that would help.
Well, I'd really like to build a clear, thought out consensus about the way forward here. You know, I've obviously proposing it, so I've got a viewpoint, but I want to make sure that whatever we pick represents a genuine consensus of the SIG, not just my view. We can talk more about that, but that was really a call for discussion, you know, via the GitHub issue and not here. But any questions, since I am like right on this call right now, yeah, feel free to ask.
I'm definitely strongly in favor of going to a more systematic, data-driven way to do feature gates. My concern might be that being in the middle of the release cycle, some of the docs in flight, some of the enhancement pieces, definitely syncing with the release team would be good. Potentially, this might be a fast follow after the release. Like this is immediately for the next release cycle. That would be the best case in my scenario.
That's when I want the PR to land. I'd love to have a ready-to-go PR, like with the wrong data in it, and then land it at the point that we've just merged, like literally we've maybe just unfrozen the repo and that one goes in or something. You know, that would be my ideal. That is, I think, a slightly different question, but it definitely related topic. I'll put a note in the agenda and /minutes. Okay, I'm going to move on to another thing that's actually, I'll put my name on it as well, that I've brought up, which is an article about deprecations. So this release, and this happens every so often, deprecates quite a few bits of Kubernetes API. So first of all, before we have to talk about the discussion, do people know what I mean by API deprecations? Any questions about that?
Yeah, I have a question. Is there a distinction made? Deprecations is basically saying it will not be supported in the future. What do you call it when you're saying it is now out of the code? It will not work anymore. Is there a different name for that? Because it seems I've gotten blurry kind of understanding of that.
We do not have good wording on this, but there is, you know, like that could be an issue. That sounds like a good thing to tackle. So we have several different things that come into play here. So features that never make it to general availability. So let's say pod security policy, which is also very much relevant. So pod security policy is up for two reasons. The whole pod security policy concept is going. We don't like it. It tried, and we're not doing it. It wasn't good enough. So there's a feature gate that you have to turn on to use pod security. Is there? Yeah, there is. Oh no. There's no feature gate for it. There's an admission controller and there's an API. I don't think there's a feature gate. Let me go and look before I. So some things are behind feature gates and some things aren't. Right. So pod security policy is an API. you can disable it by disabling the API in your cluster's API server. So the command line options for the API server let you decide which API groups you want to serve, and you could, I think you could turn off pod security policy by turning off its whole API group. That's complicated. There's also this feature gate thing. So that automated list of feature gates is about specifically things that you can turn off as a command line option to say, I don't want this feature. It's still beta and I don't want it. So if I pick a beta feature like, well, there's a few errors in there. I just noticed I should do a PR about this. Let me pick topology manager. The topology manager feature, that is enabled by default because it's beta. But if you don't want that beta feature in your cluster because it doesn't do what you want it to do, then you can launch the cluster components and not have that feature gate. And if we decided that that feature gate was no good and like we weren't going to keep it, we would deprecate it. And an example of one that we've deprecated would be dynamic auditing. You used to be able to configure the auditing configuration of Kubernetes at runtime and talk to the API server and say, you were doing auditing like this, I now want you to do auditing like that. Well, you can't do that anymore because that's a deprecated feature. But what deprecated means there is removed. And I think this is where you were confused, Chris. And I think it was a good question.
Yeah, I haven't been confused at other companies where I had this. I've been confused in terms of Kubernetes because we had an unsupported or removed from the software way of saying those things. So I didn't know that they made that distinction here. It sounds like we haven't been for Kubernetes. And that's what a lot of people will care about. They're caring about when their code will actually break. Unfortunately, they should do it long before then, but that's when all the red flags will go up. And it'll be good to have a warning a week before that, say, hey, this is about to be dropped. So if you go upgrade, you're going to be in trouble if you're still using it.
Yeah. And so what we're talking about for this V122 release is really, it's not about API deprecations, because the APIs being removed, like, for example, the beta versions of role binding and cluster role binding and cluster role and role, and the beta version of custom resource definition. It's a specific version, but it's not being deprecated. It is deprecated already. It went GA, and that meant that the beta version was became deprecated at that moment. The problem is that it's being removed. So there's a wording issue, and I think that's worth dealing with. The discussion is about these removals that we call deprecations. Should we have a blog article every release where there are removals? Should we have an ongoing process for always making that blog article writing be part of the release for like the docs release team? And then secondly, what should we do for this release, which is creeping up on us?
I think we should, and I think it should go out before the release saying, before you upgrade, know that these things are going to break if you still rely on these features.
Okay, thanks, Chris. More thoughts, people, please.
I feel like this, and we had this conversation earlier this year, I think it was. I think the problem is fundamentally a communication issue. And the hard part is it's kind of like the leading the horse to the water. Like, yes, we can do a blog post, other companies might do their own posts. A lot of folks, when the release comes out, they create their own release blog post. I know that Jordan Liggett has started in a doc form that covers some of the deprecations. So I'll link that in chat here. It really talks about some of the upcoming deprecations that are kind of in flight or underway. So like that's a good spot to definitely link in a blog post. And then, this is not just a problem for docs, but for cluster operators, owners, admins. And so there's other folks in the Kubernetes community that are building tooling around finding deprecated APIs. So I just linked in chat there a deprecation checker called KubePug. And KubePug was built by one of our community members. I believe Ricardo wrote that. Yeah, Ricardo Katz wrote that. And what this does is this will actually take a look at the Swagger API of what has been changed or deprecated and spit out that one just comment that I feel like I have to say, even though it's not quite relevant to the topic, is there's something that's a little tricky that I think is not widely known in Kubernetes, is that the etcd server will always store the manifest with the preferred version. And why this is tricky is the fact that if I were to apply a Kubernetes manifest on a 115 cluster and upgrade it over and over and over again until it gets to be to 122, it's very likely that that application will not break. And it won't be until I redeploy and hit the API where it has to do the validating webhook to get to the etcd persisting in storage. And the reason I bring that up is, you know, when you run like kubectl out YAML, or you dump some of the YAML data from your running cluster, you can say, oh, I'm not using a deprecated API version, and that's fundamentally false. And so on top of the communication problem, on top of the technology problem, on top of the various other solutions in place, I feel like I'm 100% on board with over communication on the deprecations, but it is a very hairy topic to tackle. So strong +1 for a blog post, strong +1 to talk about deprecations, the impact of folks. I think further than that, we need to talk about how folks can be proactive and solve it, and really put themselves in a posture where we're not waiting for a blog release on release day for the deprecations. And to Chris's point, you know, before you get bit, let's tell them what's going to bite them, which I think is the spirit of the deprecation API migration guide that I linked in chat. But once again, it's who knows that document is out there and who's looking for it, you know.
Are you saying maybe somebody should go in the main doc set? So, hey, prepare for deprecations, prepare for, and then, you know, say, I didn't know half that stuff you just said. So, I mean, that it's all kind of going on. And if they know it's there, they can go look in those other places. And then maybe have a blog that points back to that at some point, you know, it's a less of an effort that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I 100% agree. I think like a source of truth, and then some of those like lesser known findings that, you know, I don't think early on, especially in my Kubernetes journey, it's like I'm barely grokking a Hello World app, and I'm not worried about how etcd handles, you know, versions or preferred versions, and how do we distill that information into an actionable way. And like you were saying, Chris, maybe part of that is just pointing to a central spot and widely advertising that spot as, you know, before you're upgrading, this is somewhere you should check, and here's where everything's going to go. Here's a source of truth, and kind of make that the end all be all.
I just wanted to mention one thing about this. Well, maybe it's not that important, but there might be some clash with the release notes for each version that we do a release on, because each version also has some for example, urgent upgrade notes. No, really, you must read this before you upgrade. So it's kind of covers stuff that you should really watch out for before you do the actual upgrade. And also I see it has some deprecation section as well. Oh, I can actually copy paste this. So, you know, maybe maybe we should try not to duplicate this, or maybe we should link to it directly. Probably. That makes sense.
Yep. Yes. Strong +1, and you're spot on there. It's either potentially making that the source of truth, or potentially including some of those links that I was sharing as far as proactively, you know, preparing people in the future. And that would be coordination with SIG release and the release notes team alongside docs.
The thought I have about that blog article is that if we could get Liaison and say, let's agree the wording for these breaking changes, say, you know, 3 weeks out from the release, 2 weeks out from the release, whatever. Earlier, ideally, if we, you know, for the long-term process, and say this, like, we know that custom resource definition is going to be V1 only, and earlier versions of the custom resource definition API. And we've known that for a long time. So we've had a long time where we could have come up with a release note for that and said, okay, no, really, you must read this before you upgrade. Could have written that last year. And in that time period, in that 9 or 12 months that we've got, when we know what's coming up, we could be drafting a really good release note and a blog article and have a comm strategy. So that's my ideal. And I think what we could do for this release is, so long as we can say this is what the wording will be, we can use exactly the same wording in the release notes and in the blog article, and be confident that they are, you know, identical. Yeah, so I'll put a comment about wording in both places. More thoughts, people, while I type.
Yeah, I think, to me, the big thing was that one of my confusions too is that, just a common terminology around when these things are gone so that everybody knows that when you see it in whatever doc, that's what they're talking about. Unsupported, dropped from the code. I don't know, whatever you guys want to call it. I'm trying to look to see other deprecations, what other like software companies do. So haven't found much yet.
Usually,
so one of the challenge. Go ahead,
sir. Just wanted to mention one thing. Usually what I came across, I'm not sure if in our docs is, usually it's something like has been deprecated and removed. So it's, accompanied by and removed. So that the current version doesn't have it whatsoever.
And one other thing too is I've seen, and I think Jordan Liggett was leading this effort for SIG CLI. kubectl will also mention things that are being deprecated in the future. So if you were to apply an ingress using the beta version that is not quite deprecated in the release you have, they will still apply it with a warning saying, hey, just a heads up, this is going to be deprecated in 1.2.2, for example. And I think that those are also incredibly helpful as well.
Yeah, that definitely ties in with the subtlety point, because if you're, for example, you're using a current kubectl, your cluster's reasonably, you could have a V1 1.21 cluster and a current kubectl, and your CI system goes ahead and applies that V1 beta 1 ingress resource. And if you go and use kubectl to check all your ingresses, yeah, there you are, V1 ingresses, because that's how Kubernetes works. Shannon, you had a comment. Could you clarify what you're suggesting?
Oh, this was just talking about differentiating between the two terms, deprecated and removing it. Like I noticed something in the deprecation guide that Jim linked saying will no longer serve the following deprecated versions, which I assume just is the deprecation. But we were talking about saying removed, so we'll remove the following deprecated API versions because they were deprecated and now they're being removed.
Not common, consistent. Okay, so what you're saying, if I've understood that right, is that we should, we should update this. The way that we should make sure we communicate this clearly is by a change to the style guide that says this is how you describe something that's deprecated and still there. This is how you describe something that's deprecated and removed, and basically cover all of the cases that where different ways for things to be removed from Kubernetes. Great. So Chris and Shannon, you've kind of made the point there. Would one of you two be willing to open the issue about that and log that? Okay, you're both nodding. You can log two issues, but I mark one of them as a duplicate.
Go ahead, take it, Shannon. It's yours. You got it.
Cool. That's quite a bit of conversation on the deprecations blog article. There is more to have. I think we should move this to Slack, and it's coming up to the hour. So let's move on to the next thing about Redis versus MongoDB. It's not got a name on it. So whose item is this?
That is mine. And really just wanted to bring this up for context and have a chance to talk about this so we're all on the same page. I went kind of down this Redis MongoDB rabbit hole over the past 2 weeks or so. And I wanted to summarize here with some context. And so originally, Kubernetes there is the K/K examples, which are used for end-to-end testing of application YAML. And then there's also K/website, our main Kubernetes website repository, also containing similar examples, if not one-to-one matching examples that are used more for the end user, the consumer, to follow like a tutorial. Here's how you deploy a guestbook application, kind of the hello world experience that y'all would expect to get from documentation. So the first issue, or the first thing that everyone should be aware of, is that there is two sources of the same doc. Dual sourced content is usually a pain point when it comes to documentation. So that's kind of a constraint issue there. The second piece is Redis was referring to some inappropriate terminology, and part of our working group naming improvements that we were doing, we were changing the words from master and slave to leader follower and some of the more accepted terminology around some of these deployments. So with that context, we had a user come out and submit a PR that had, let me take a step back. Originally, these examples were leveraging MongoDB, or no, they're originally leveraging Redis. They're originally leveraging Redis. A PR came to fix, and instead of changing the inappropriate terminology on Redis, switching to leader follower, the user said, hey, it would be a lot easier if we just use MongoDB, and I'm going to create this PR. And we all said, great. Look, we got rid of the inappropriate terminology. We're using MongoDB. That is a fine solution, and we definitely value PRs and action over, open issues and lack of action. So with that, there was not a ton of bike shedding, or I guess there's a little bit of like, do we really want to switch from Redis to Mongo? Is this it gets to more of a vendoring discussion here, which I don't think we have any interest in. And ultimately it was, okay, this PR is done. It works. It's technically functional. There's no inappropriate terminology or language. Let's go ahead and merge the example as is leveraging Mongo. And what it turned out was those repos, both of them, the example in KK and the example in K website, were actually sourced from a Google documentation or a Google example, which just so happens to also have fixed their example with the inappropriate terminology. So for those that are keeping up with this, it turns out that we were actually try sourcing the content and taking it from this Google GCP document. And now we got into this fractured state of there's the source of truth from Google around this guestbook Hello World example. And now there's this fragmented one that is no longer leveraging the same backend database, and that's merged in the Kubernetes website. And one thing that we try to avoid in SIG Docs is technical debt and I guess additional maintenance that is unneeded. So ultimately, I created a PR to revert the MongoDB example to use Redis following the Google GCP documentation. And I have a follow-up PR to then change the Kubernetes examples to also match that same MongoDB or to match the Redis that we are now synchronized. Part of the effort was also adding in comments saying, hey, look, the source of this documentation is not here. It is actually, the drones you're looking for are on the GCP documentation. And the reason I bring all this up is in the issue I linked here was there was another PR that I believe got merged or still open right now. So this one that's open is updating the MongoDB and some technical challenges there. And I really feel like we should just stick with the source content in GCP, and we really shouldn't deviate from that, especially if it avoids technical overhead. It's a single source of technical debt from the GCP side. And this is a very long-winded way of saying we got into this mess because we didn't really have an opinion. And I think it's time that we have an opinion to single source the content and go from there. And I'm just trying to put this all out there so we can be all on the same page of how we got here, where we are today, and kind of what the next steps are moving forward. And I'll stop there and see if there's any questions.
So you're talking about taking that code out of Kubernetes code and just pointing back to the Google site to get it? Or I don't think you want to do that, right?
Correct. Yeah. So we're still stuck copying the data from the Google repo. But what I'm getting at is, let's say there's a functional issue with the example we're using in MongoDB. Instead of having the issue in K website, the issue should be opened up on the Google repo, and we should be sourcing everything through and kind of channeling it through a single source. Whereas right now, if we accept the PR that I linked here, it's going to continue that fragmentation of leveraging Mongo versus Redis, which is on the single source. And I'm not talking about Redis versus Mongo or any of that stuff. It's really, if the source of truth is in the Google repo, let's just use that until proven otherwise. And if we want to run our own example, I'm fine with that too. But let's not, create multiple sources and fragment this way much further than we already have.
I might just ask one question, Jim. Who do you work for?
I do work for Google, and I'm happy to deviate from Google 100%. Like I said, I really just want to get down to where we're not creating multiple sources of this document.
I just wanted to, I don't think there's an interest there, but I wanted it declared because we believe in transparency.
I'm all for it 100%. So yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. And yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm seeing in the chat comments, Shannon's for single sourcing, Ray is for reducing technical debt. I'm also for technical debt. Anyone in favor of technical debt? I know, hands up now. It's a very biased way of framing it. Is there anyone who disagrees with Jim's thesis there, or has questions, in fact? Okay. I mean, yeah, I'm happy to say go with the single sourcing approach, and I think your explanation for why, Jim, was very thorough.
Cool. Thanks. And like I said, I really just want to bring context up, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Cool. Eddie, we have an agenda. Let me just put the agenda in the chat. Is there anything you want to put on that agenda? Because I know you've been trying to join these meetings a few times.
No, I just got done with SIG testing and popped over.
Okay. Chris, weekly blog meetings.
Yeah, I tried to put it. I don't have edit permission here, by the way, so I requested it. But yeah, yes, I did want to discuss that. So thanks for the link. I looked at the agenda. Bunch of I won't.
Yeah, you're breaking up really pretty badly.
It was bi-weekly. Do a good cadence for this. Does somebody else want to run it, or do you want me? I don't mind waking it back up. Yeah. I'm breaking up. Okay.
Yeah, Chris, my suggestion is try turning off video and then repeat what you said. Sorry.
Yeah, you also muted
Chris, you're
yourself
muted now.
So, yeah.
So Chris, you would need to unmute and then repeat what you said. I will also put that in the chat. I can request unmuting. Okay, I'm going to give Chris a moment to. Okay, I think the gods of the internet have not been kind to Chris there. I'm going to suggest we put that on the next agenda. Anything want people to say about the weekly blog meetings?
I like them. No, I'm just messing. I don't have too much of an opinion on that.
It's something I want to see picked up. I would love to see help on that. One of the challenges that I have seen, and I will say this for sort of the record, is that the time clashes with this meeting. So that's not very effective for people who want to join both things. I don't know what the answer is. Like, lots of times clash with lots of things, but I personally don't think I could join in. I would pick this meeting over the blog meeting. So we should watch out for that.
That's a simple question of why don't we move the time for the SIG Docs blog meeting?
Yeah. I think that the question is, I guess since we got people on the call, what time would work for people who want to go to that meeting?
I don't even see it in the calendar. Is it in the official SIG Docs calendar by any chance?
No, but we can add it. It is usually, I believe, 17:30 UTC on a Tuesday. That's about an hour ago in the summer, and the same time in the winter.
My opinion would be moving it to a different day and keeping the same time if it worked for most folks. I think this has came up in the past before, and it was scheduled for the current time based on preference. I'm not sure how they wound up conflicting. I don't think they always conflicted, but yeah, I think given the smaller team and the smaller group for the blog, there should be no problem changing it.
Mm-hmm. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to change it from weekly to regular, because would fortnightly meetings work better for people? Would that help with attendance?
Would that be fortnightly at the same time as before, like an hour ago, basically?
At any time, so for me, I would find fortnightly easier. Chris, you're back. Feel free to unmute and chip in. I will click the ask to unmute button again and see if Zoom likes you more. Okay, I'll also mention it in the chat. Right, I think we should park this. I think we should come back to this next week. Please feel free to discuss weekly meetings on Slack and so on. I will try to make time to organize stuff. Oh, comment, let's see. Okay, thanks, Shannon. Yeah, I'm going to wrap things up. Last chance to tell me that we should discuss something else. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're done. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome.
See you next week.
Good, man.
Thank you.
Bye.